Some wounds never heal, and some words are never spoken until it's almost too late. For 15 years, Silas Boone has lived alone in the Bitterroot Mountains, haunted by the brother he lost and the bitter words that drove them apart. When a wounded donkey appears at his cabin door one morning, Silas finds a note tied to its halter that changes everything. The message is from Emmett, his younger brother he thought was gone forever. For all the things I couldn't say, maybe he can carry them better than I did. As the old mountain man reads those words, he breaks down completely. This beaten-up donkey has traveled hundreds of miles to deliver the most important message of Silas's life. What terrible journey brought this animal to his door, and what happened to the brother who sent it? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist hung thick between the towering pines as Silas Boone knelt beside the wounded donkey in his cabin's clearing. His weathered hands, scarred from decades of mountain living, moved with surprising gentleness as he examined the animal's injuries. 3 deep gashes marked its flanks, and its left foreleg bore the swollen evidence of a hard fall. Yet despite its obvious pain, the creature's dark eyes held a stubborn dignity that reminded Silas of someone he'd tried hard to forget. The yellowed note crinkled in his shirt pocket as he shifted position, its words already burned into his memory. Emmett's handwriting, still recognizable after all these years, though shakier now, more desperate. Silas had read those words a dozen times since dawn, each reading hitting him like a punch to the chest. "Easy there, old friend," he murmured to the donkey, applying salve to the worst of the wounds. "You've come a long way to find me, haven't you?" The animal nickered softly as if understanding. Its pack lay nearby where Silas had carefully removed it, the leather worn smooth by countless miles and harsh weather. Whatever journey had brought this messenger to his door had been neither short nor easy. Silas's cabin sat in a natural bowl carved between 3 peaks. Accessible only by a narrow trail he'd spent years making deliberately difficult to follow. He'd chosen this place for its isolation, its ability to keep the world, and his memories at bay. Pine and aspen surrounded the clearing, their branches forming a living wall that changed with the seasons but never truly opened. In winter, the snow could pile 8 feet deep, cutting him off completely for months at a time. He preferred it that way. The cabin itself was solid work, built with his own hands from lodgepole pine and chinked with mountain clay. 2 rooms and a stone fireplace, with a root cellar dug deep into the hillside. Everything a man needed to live simply and alone. The only decorations were practical. His father's rifle mounted above the mantel, a few books on wilderness medicine and animal husbandry, and a single photograph of his parents on their wedding day. Nothing of Emmett. He'd made sure of that, or so he'd thought. The carved wooden horse sat on the mantel now, its painted surface faded, but still recognizable. Silas had found it that morning while searching for medical supplies, tucked behind his father's old ammunition box, where he'd apparently hidden it 15 years ago. Emmett had carved it during the long winter when they were 12 and 10, working for weeks with their father's whittling knife until his fingers bled from the effort. The little horse had been Emmett's pride and joy until the day Silas, in a fit of jealous rage, had thrown it into the creek. He'd fished it out later, of course, when his anger cooled, and he saw his little brother's tears. But the damage was done, in more ways than one. That had been the beginning of the crack between them, the first sign that their brotherhood wouldn't survive the storms ahead. "You always were too trusting for your own good," Silas said to the donkey, though his words were meant for a different audience entirely. "Should have known better than to come looking for me." The animal huffed and nudged his shoulder with its muzzle, a gesture so gentle it nearly broke him again. When was the last time any living creature had shown him such simple affection? Years, certainly. Maybe decades. Silas had been 25 when he'd fled into these mountains, driven by guilt and grief he couldn't bear to face. Emmett had been just 23, newly married to a girl from town whose name Silas had forced himself to forget. The wedding should have been a celebration, a new beginning for the Boone family after so much loss. Instead, it had become the final battleground for years of accumulated resentment. Their father had died 2 years earlier, leaving behind a modest ranch and a will that split everything equally between his sons. But equal didn't mean simple. The ranch needed work, needed investment, needed one of them to stay and run it, while the other pursued different dreams. Emmett had wanted to explore, to prospect for gold in the Northern Territories, to see something of the world beyond their valley. Silas had wanted to build something lasting, to honor their father's memory by making the ranch profitable. The argument that split them apart hadn't been about money, though. Money they could have worked out. It had been about trust, about loyalty, about the weight of responsibility and who should bear it. Words had been said that couldn't be taken back, accusations flung like stones in their childhood creek. By the time the dust settled, Emmett was gone, and Silas was alone with a ranch he no longer wanted, and guilt that gnawed at him like a persistent wound. He'd sold the ranch within a year, unable to bear the memories it held. The money had bought him supplies and solitude, everything he thought he needed to start over. But starting over, he'd learned, was different from moving on. 15 years of mountain living had taught him to track elk through fresh snow, to read weather patterns in the behavior of birds, to live off the land with nothing but his wits and will. It hadn't taught him how to forgive himself. The donkey shifted under his hands, reminding him of the present moment. Its breathing was steady now, the worst of its injuries cleaned and bandaged. It would live, though it would carry scars from whatever ordeal had brought it here. Scars, Silas reflected, seemed to be the common currency of the Boone family. He rose and walked to his cabin's single window, gazing out at the mountains that had been his sanctuary and his prison. Somewhere beyond those peaks, Emmett had lived his own life, made his own choices, perhaps even found peace. The note suggested otherwise, but 15 years was a long time. People changed. Circumstances changed. Brothers became strangers. The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the mist and revealing the full scope of the wilderness that surrounded them. This was God's country, vast and unforgiving, but possessed of a beauty that could break your heart if you let it. Silas had let it, had used that beauty as a buffer against human connection and its inevitable disappointments. The mountains didn't judge. They didn't abandon you when times got hard. They simply endured, season after season, storm after storm, but mountains didn't forgive either. And they didn't love you back. The donkey struggled to its feet, testing its injured leg with careful weight. It was healing fast, faster than Silas had expected. Mountain animals were tough that way. They had to be to survive. The creature moved to the edge of the clearing and looked back the way it had come, ears pricked forward as if listening for something only it could hear. "Missing home already?" Silas asked, following its gaze. "Can't say I blame you. This place isn't exactly built for company." But even as he spoke, something stirred in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. Purpose, maybe, or responsibility. The donkey had come to him for a reason, carrying more than just Emmett's note. It carried hope, fragile and foolish as that might be. Hope that 15 years of silence could be broken, that words spoken in anger could be answered with something better. The carved horse seemed to watch him from the mantle, its painted eyes holding all the innocence of childhood dreams. Emmett had believed in those dreams once, had believed that anything was possible with enough determination and love. Silas had been the practical one, the one who pointed out obstacles and limitations. Funny how those roles had reversed. Emmett the one who'd gone out into the world to chase impossible things. Silas the one who'd retreated into dreams of solitude and simplicity. Perhaps it was time to be practical again. The donkey needed care, needed time to heal properly before it could travel. And if it had come from wherever Emmett was now, it might be the only link Silas had to a brother he'd given up for lost. The note suggested Emmett was still alive, still thinking of him after all these years. That had to count for something. As the sun reached its zenith, Silas made a decision that surprised him with its clarity. He would tend the donkey until it was strong enough to travel. He would study its gear, its condition, any clues it might carry about Emmet's life and circumstances. And then, God help him, he would follow it back to wherever it had come from. The mountains would wait, they always did. But brothers were mortal, and time had already taken too much from both of them. The donkey seemed to sense his resolve. It moved closer, pressing its warm flank against his leg in a gesture of trust and companionship. For the first time in 15 years, Silas Boone didn't feel completely alone in the world. It wasn't much, the beginning of hope rather than its fulfillment. But beginnings mattered. Emmet had taught him that, back when they were boys, and every day held new possibilities. Maybe some lessons were worth remembering after all. The discovery came by accident 3 days later, as Silas was cleaning the donkey's pack more thoroughly. He'd been gentle at first, respecting what seemed like personal belongings, but something about the way the leather sat had nagged at him. The pack was too heavy for its apparent contents, and there were stains on the saddlebags that looked suspiciously like dried blood. His fingers found the hidden compartment sewn into the pack's lining, disguised so well that only someone with his tracking experience would have noticed the slight irregularity. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay a map that made his blood run cold. The parchment was torn along one edge and stained with what was definitely blood. Not old blood, but recent enough to still carry a rust-red color. Silas spread it carefully on his kitchen table, weighing the corners with smooth river stones. The map showed a route through some of the most dangerous territory in the northern mountains, places where decent folks didn't travel and smart folks didn't linger. The trail marked in faded ink wound through Apache country, past abandoned mining camps known for violence and desperation. Worse, it led through the Broken Tooth Pass, a narrow canyon where claim jumpers and road agents liked to set their ambushes. Silas had heard stories about that pass from traders and trappers, stories of men who went in and never came out, their bones picked clean by crows and forgotten by the world. But it was the notations scrawled in the margins that truly frightened him. Emmet's handwriting again, but urgent now, desperate. "They know" was written near one creek crossing. "Can't go back" marked another section. And near the end of the trail, in letters that seemed to shake with fear, "Tell Silas I was wrong." Silas's hands trembled as he traced the route with his finger. Whatever had driven Emmet to travel such a path had been serious enough to risk his life. The map suggested he'd been running from something or someone, and that the danger had been real enough to make him consider reaching out to the brother he'd left behind. A thorough search of the donkey's gear revealed more disturbing evidence. An empty ammunition pouch, torn so violently that the leather had ripped clean through. Fragments of expensive cloth, wool and silk that spoke of prosperity rather than the rough clothing of a prospector or trapper. And wrapped carefully in the donkey's blanket, a piece of mirror glass with bullet holes through it, edges sharp enough to cut. Each item told part of a story Silas didn't want to believe. Emmet had been involved in something dangerous, something that had brought violence down on him. The mirror suggested an ambush. Road agents often used them to signal each other or to blind their victims. The expensive cloth meant money was involved. Probably more money than an honest man could earn in these mountains. The donkey watched him examine each piece, its dark eyes seeming to understand the gravity of what was being revealed. When Silas held up the torn ammunition pouch, the animal whinnied softly and pawed at the ground, its agitation clear. "You saw it happen, didn't you?" Silas murmured, running his hand along the donkey's neck. "You were there when they came for him." The animal's response was answer enough. It pressed closer to him, seeking comfort from memories that probably still haunted its dreams. Whatever had happened to Emmet, this loyal creature had witnessed it all, and somehow escaped to bring word to the only family Emmet had left. Silas walked to his window and stared out at the peaceful mountains, their snow-capped peaks serene under the afternoon sun. Somewhere beyond that beauty, his brother was either dead or in terrible danger. The practical part of his mind, the part that had kept him alive for 15 years in the wilderness, whispered that it was probably too late. The blood on the map, the violence suggested by the artifacts, the dangerous country the trail led through. All of it pointed to a man who'd gotten in over his head and paid the ultimate price. But there was another voice in his head now, one that sounded suspiciously like their father. "Family stands by family," the old man had always said. "When the chips are down and the wolves are howling, blood is all you can count on." Silas had forgotten that lesson in his anger and pride, had let 15 years pass without so much as a word to his only brother. If Emmett was dead, that silence would be the heaviest burden Silas would ever carry, and if he was alive, if there was even a chance he was alive, then Silas had to try. The decision, when it came, felt as inevitable as the changing seasons. He would follow the trail marked on that blood-stained map, no matter where it led or what he found at the end of it. He would take the donkey as his guide. The animal clearly knew the way and had already proven its courage and loyalty. Together, they would retrace Emmett's desperate journey and discover the truth of what had happened to him. Silas began his preparations that very afternoon, moving with a purpose he hadn't felt in years. His father's rifle came down from the mantel, its action still smooth and true, despite its age. Ammunition carefully counted and portioned. Dried meat and hardtack, enough for 2 weeks on the trail. Medical supplies, rope, his best hunting knife, everything a man might need to survive in hostile country or to fight his way out of it. The donkey seemed to understand what was happening. As Silas packed his gear, the animal grew increasingly restless, pacing the clearing and looking toward the trail that led down from the mountains. It was eager to go, eager to complete whatever mission Emmett had given it, but it was also afraid. Silas could see it in the way the donkey's ears flicked at every sound, in how it startled at shadows that hadn't bothered it before. Whatever had happened on that marked trail had left its mark on more than just the map. As the sun began to set behind the peaks, Silas sat on his porch and studied the map one more time. The route would take them through country he'd avoided for good reason, lawless territory where a man's life was worth less than the bullets it took to end it. He would be leaving the safety of his mountain sanctuary for dangers he might not be skilled enough to handle. At 52, he wasn't the man he'd been at 25, and the years of solitude hadn't exactly prepared him for gunfights and desperate chases. But none of that mattered anymore. Emmett was out there somewhere, and the note tied to the donkey's halter had been a cry for help 15 years in the making. Whatever bitter words had passed between them, whatever pride and stubbornness had kept them apart, family was still family. Blood was still blood. The donkey came to stand beside his chair as darkness gathered, its presence a solid comfort in the growing shadows. Tomorrow they would begin a journey that might very well end both their lives. But tonight, for the first time in 15 years, Silas Boone felt like he had a purpose worth the risk. He folded the map carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket next to Emmett's note. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. Dawn broke clear and cold. As Silas loaded his pack, the weight of 15 years of isolation settling on his shoulders like an old coat. The donkey stood patiently while he secured his gear, its breath forming small clouds in the crisp mountain air. Everything he might need for the journey was carefully arranged. Ammunition in waterproof pouches, dried provisions wrapped in oiled canvas, his father's rifle cleaned and ready as he cinched the last strap. His fingers brushed against something hard tucked deep in the donkey's pack. Curious, he worked it free and found himself holding a silver compass, its surface tarnished but still functional. The engraving on the back made his breath catch. To William Boone, true north always. Margaret, their father's compass, the one that had guided him through 20 years of surveying and prospecting before he'd settled down to raise a family. Silas remembered this compass from his childhood, how his father would let him hold it on their hunting trips, teaching him to read the magnetic needle and understand the concept of true direction. When their father died, the compass had gone to Emmett as part of his inheritance, along with the wandering spirit that seemed to run in the Boone bloodline. Finding it here, in the donkey's pack, was like receiving a message from beyond the grave. Their father had always said that a man needed to know his true direction in life, not just on the trail. "The compass points north," he'd told them, "but it's up to you to decide where north leads." Silas turned the compass over in his weathered hands, watching the needle swing toward magnetic north with the same steady certainty it had shown for decades. Emmett had carried this with him on whatever journey had brought him to grief. Now it would guide Silas on the path to find him. "You ready for this, old friend?" he asked the donkey, which he'd taken to calling messenger in his thoughts. The animal nickered softly and turned toward the trail leading down from his mountain sanctuary. Ears pricked forward with unmistakable eagerness. The descent began before full sunrise, their breath mingling in the cold air as they picked their way down the narrow path Silas had deliberately kept rough and unwelcoming. Every step took them further from the safety of his hermit existence and closer to whatever dangers had claimed his brother. The familiar weight of his father's rifle across his back provided some comfort. But Silas knew that 15 years of mountain solitude hadn't prepared him for human conflict. Messenger proved to be an excellent trail companion, sure-footed on the rocky slopes and seemingly tireless despite his recent injuries. More than that, the donkey displayed an intelligence that surprised Silas. When they reached a fork in the trail where the official path diverged from a barely visible game track, Messenger immediately chose the hidden route without hesitation. It was as if the animal had memorized every twist and turn of the journey it had made to find him. By midday, they had descended far enough to encounter signs of other travelers. Bootprints in the mud near a creek crossing, the cold ashes of a campfire that was maybe 2 days old, and most troubling of all, the carcass of a horse that had been shot rather than dying naturally. The bullet hole behind the ear was small and precise, the work of someone who knew how to kill, quickly and quietly. Silas knelt beside the dead horse, reading the story told by the tracks around it. At least 3 men had been here, probably more. They'd killed the horse, not for meat. The carcass was untouched by knives, but because it was injured and slowing them down. The kind of practical brutality that spoke of men in a hurry, men running from something or chasing it. Messenger grew agitated at the sight of the dead horse, dancing nervously and pulling at his lead rope. The donkey's distress suggested it recognized this place, had perhaps been here before, under very different circumstances. Silas found himself wondering if this had been part of Emmett's party, if his brother had been forced to watch as his companions eliminated anything that might slow their escape. They pushed on through the afternoon, following a trail that grew increasingly treacherous as it wound through narrow defiles and across exposed ridges. The country was changing around them, becoming wilder and more lawless with each mile. This was territory where honest men traveled in large groups or not at all, where the law was whatever a man could enforce with his gun and his will. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Silas called a halt in a sheltered grove near a small stream. The water was clear and cold, perfect for refilling their canteens and giving Messenger a well-deserved drink. But as the donkey lowered its head to the stream, Silas noticed something that made his blood run cold. Scratched into the bark of a nearby aspen tree were fresh initials, EB plus MR, Emmett Boone plus someone with the initials MR. The carving was recent, probably made within the last few weeks, and below it, someone had scratched a rough heart. Even in his desperate flight, Emmett had taken time to memorialize what looked like a love affair. The discovery hit Silas like a physical blow. Emmett had found someone, had fallen in love deeply enough to risk marking their initials on a tree in the middle of dangerous country. The romantic gesture spoke of a man who still believed in hope and love, despite whatever troubles were pursuing him. It made the silence between the brothers even more painful. 15 years during which Emmett had lived, loved, and apparently found happiness that Silas knew nothing about. Messenger noticed Silas's distress and moved closer, pressing his warm flank against the man's leg in a gesture of comfort. The donkey's loyalty was absolute and unconditional, a sharp contrast to the pride and stubbornness that had kept the Boone brothers apart for so long. He found someone, Silas murmured to the animal, running his hand along its neck. After all these years, he found someone who mattered enough to carve her initials in a tree. Makes you wonder what else I missed while I was playing hermit in the mountains. The shadows were growing longer, and Prudence suggested they should make camp soon, rather than travel in darkness through unfamiliar and potentially hostile territory. But the initials on the tree had given Silas a sense of urgency that hadn't been there before. Emmett wasn't just his estranged brother anymore. He was a man in love, a man who had found something worth fighting for. If there was any chance he was still alive, still in need of help, then every hour of delay might be the one that cost him his life. As they prepared to move deeper into the wilderness, Silas found himself gripping his father's compass with new determination. True north had never mattered more than it did right now. Somewhere ahead, following the needle's steady guidance, lay answers to questions that had haunted him for 15 years. Whether those answers would bring peace or more pain remained to be seen, but Silas was committed to finding them. The donkey seemed to sense his renewed resolve. As they prepared to continue down the trail, Messenger's step was lighter, his bearing more confident. They were both going home in a way, following a path that might finally lead them to where they belonged. The morning of their third day on the trail brought unwelcome company. Silas heard them before he saw them, the clip-clop of multiple horses moving at a leisurely pace, accompanied by the low murmur of conversation that carried farther than the riders probably intended. He quickly led Messenger off the main path and into a cluster of boulders, where they could observe without being seen. 3 men on horseback came into view, their mounts well-fed and their gear expensive. Not prospectors or trappers then, but men with money and purpose. The leader was a lean man, with a carefully waxed mustache and a pearl-handled pistol that caught the morning light. His companions looked like hired muscle, broad-shouldered men with the relaxed alertness of those accustomed to violence. "Trail's still fresh," the leader was saying as they passed. "Can't be more than a week ahead of us." "Assuming the beast didn't die in the wilderness," replied one of his companions, a man with arms like tree trunks and scars across his knuckles. "Lot of ways for a pack animal to meet its end out here." The leader pulled up his horse and studied the path ahead with predatory focus. "That donkey's too smart to die easy, and too valuable to lose. When we catch up to it, we'll have everything we need to finish this business properly." Silas's blood turned cold. They were hunting Messenger, which meant they were connected to whatever had happened to Emmett. The casual way they discussed the donkey's value suggested it carried more than sentimental importance. Perhaps it held information or evidence that could harm them. After the riders disappeared around a bend in the trail, Silas remained hidden for another hour, making sure they weren't doubling back. When he finally emerged from cover, he found Messenger trembling. Whether from cold or fear, he couldn't say. The donkey had clearly recognized the voices, and its reaction confirmed Silas's worst suspicions about what they were walking into. "Easy, boy," he whispered, stroking the animal's neck. "We're not going to let them catch us." But even as he spoke the words, Silas felt a chill of doubt. 3 armed men on horseback against 1 aging hermit and a wounded donkey. The odds were not encouraging. His years of mountain living had taught him survival skills, but avoiding human predators was different from tracking elk or weathering storms. As they continued down the trail, Silas found himself checking their back trail constantly, expecting to see pursuers at any moment. The landscape around them was becoming more open, offering fewer places to hide, but better visibility of potential threats. Rolling hills covered with sagebrush and scattered groves of aspen stretched toward distant mountains. Beautiful but unforgiving country, where a man could see trouble coming from miles away. It was near midday when Messenger led him off the main trail toward what looked like a pile of weathered rocks. As they drew closer, Silas realized it was actually the ruins of an old cabin, its roof collapsed and walls partially fallen. But someone had been here recently, very recently. The ashes in the fire pit were still warm, and fresh boot prints marked the dusty floor. More important was what he found tucked behind a loose stone in the cabin's foundation. Another piece of the puzzle that was Emmett's story, a fragment of a wanted poster. Torn and stained, but still legible enough to make Silas's heart race. The partial image showed a man's face, undoubtedly Emmett, though older and harder than Silas remembered. Below the picture were the words "wanted for" and "reward 500, with the rest torn away. But it was enough to confirm what Silas had begun to suspect. His brother had become an outlaw, a man with a price on his head. The shock of seeing Emmett's face on a wanted poster was like a physical blow. This wasn't the boy who had carved wooden horses and dreamed of adventure. This was a man who had run afoul of the law, who had enemies willing to pay handsomely for his capture. The romantic notions Silas had harbored about rescuing his wayward brother suddenly seemed naive and dangerous. But as he studied the poster more carefully, details began to bother him. The image was too clear, too professional for a typical frontier wanted poster. Most such notices were crude sketches or poor photographs, but this showed remarkable detail and quality. Moreover, the reward amount was unusually high for a simple criminal. $500 was the kind of money offered for killers and bank robbers, not petty thieves or claim jumpers. Messenger grew increasingly agitated as they examined the ruins, pacing in tight circles and occasionally pawing at specific spots on the ground. Following the donkey's lead, Silas discovered more evidence of recent occupation, a tin cup that still held dregs of coffee, a piece of jerky wrapped in cloth, and most telling of all, a few strands of brown hair caught on a splintered beam at shoulder height. Emmett had been here, probably within the last few days. The realization filled Silas with both hope and dread. His brother was alive, or had been very recently, but he was also clearly running from determined pursuers. The 3 riders they'd encountered that morning were probably just one group among many, hunting for the man whose face graced that wanted poster. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen, Silas made the difficult decision to push on, rather than make camp in the ruins. If Emmett had used this place as a way station, others might know about it too. The last thing he wanted was to be trapped in a partially collapsed building when hostile visitors arrived. Messenger seemed eager to leave as well, tugging at his lead rope and looking toward a narrow canyon that led deeper into the mountains. The donkey's behavior suggested their destination lay in that direction. Through country that looked increasingly wild and lawless, they traveled until nearly dark, following game trails and dried creek beds that would hide their passage from casual observers. When they finally made camp in a hidden grove near a small spring, Silas allowed himself no fire despite the evening chill. The risk of discovery was too great now that he knew they were being actively pursued. As he shared his meager dinner with Messenger, Silas found himself studying the torn wanted poster by moonlight. Whatever Emmett had done, whatever crimes he was accused of, the boy Silas remembered was still somewhere inside that harder face. The brother who had carved wooden horses and believed in impossible dreams deserved the chance to tell his side of the story. Tomorrow would bring them deeper into dangerous territory, closer to whatever truth awaited at the end of their journey. But tonight, under the vast canopy of mountain stars, Silas allowed himself to hope that 15 years of silence could still be overcome by the simple fact of brotherhood. Family was family, regardless of wanted posters or the prices placed on their heads. The 4th day brought them into mining country, where scarred hillsides and abandoned claims spoke of desperate men chasing elusive fortunes. The air itself seemed different here, thinner somehow, tainted with the metallic taste of broken dreams and bitter disappointments. Messenger picked his way carefully through the debris of failed enterprises, rusted sluice boxes, collapsed mine shafts, and the skeletal remains of wooden structures that had once housed hope. It was near one of these abandoned operations that Silas made the discovery that changed everything. Tucked beneath a pile of rocks that had clearly been placed deliberately lay a leather document case, its contents protected by oiled cloth and careful wrapping. Inside, Silas found papers that made him question everything he thought he knew about his brother's situation. The gold mining claim was official, properly filed with territorial authorities, and bearing all the necessary stamps and signatures. According to the documents, Emmett Boone and his partner, one Miguel Rodriguez, held legal rights to a section of Willow Creek that showed significant promise for placer mining. The claim was dated just 8 months ago, suggesting that Emmett's recent troubles were connected to this venture. But more interesting than the claim itself were the assay reports tucked between its pages. The ore samples from Emmett's claim showed remarkable purity, the kind of gold content that could make men rich quickly and attract the wrong sort of attention just as fast. Scrawled notes in the margins, written in Emmett's careful hand, documented the increasing yields and his growing excitement about the find. "Miguel thinks we're sitting on the mother lode," one note read. "Says he's never seen ore this pure outside of California. We could be rich men by Christmas if we can keep the claim jumpers away." The optimism in those early notes stood in stark contrast to later entries, which grew increasingly dark and worried. "Strange men asking questions in town," Emmett had written. "Miguel says they're working for the Territorial Mining Company, trying to find legal ways to take our claim. Might have to move the operation to keep it safe." The final entry, dated just 3 weeks ago, sent a chill down Silas's spine. "They killed Miguel last night. Made it look like an accident, but I know better. They want the claim, and they'll kill anyone who stands in their way. Have to run. Can't trust anyone now except maybe old Loyalty here." The reference to Loyalty was clearly about Messenger, whose real name apparently reflected the bond between donkey and master. Silas looked up at Messenger, Loyalty, with new understanding. This wasn't just a pack animal that had wandered into his clearing. This was Emmett's partner, in every sense that mattered. The only witness to whatever violence had destroyed his brother's attempt at legitimate prosperity. The intelligence he'd observed in the donkey's behavior suddenly made perfect sense. "You were there when they killed his partner," Silas said softly, and Loyalty's ears drooped as if understanding. "You saw what they did, and you helped him escape." The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place now, painting a picture that was both clearer and more disturbing than Silas had imagined. Emmett hadn't turned outlaw by choice. He'd been forced into flight by claim jumpers who would stop at nothing to steal his legitimate find. The wanted poster was probably fabricated, a way to turn the law against him and make his eventual murder look justified. A sound from the trail below interrupted his thoughts. Horses approaching at a steady pace. Silas quickly gathered the documents and stuffed them into his pack, then led Loyalty deeper into the maze of mining debris. From their hiding place behind a collapsed ore cart, he watched as the same 3 riders from the previous day came into view, their leader studying the ground with the focused attention of an experienced tracker. "Lost the trail yesterday," the lean man with the pearl-handled pistol was saying. "But they can't have gone far with that lame donkey slowing them down." "Maybe the beast finally died," suggested the scarred man. "Save us the trouble of hunting it down." The leader dismounted and walked to the exact spot where Silas had found the document case, his eyes scanning the disturbed rocks with professional interest. "Someone's been here recently, very recently." He knelt and picked up a scrap of oiled cloth that Silas had dropped in his haste to hide. "And they found something we missed." The third man, who had been silent until now, spoke up with the accent of an educated Easterner. "If they have the claim documents, that could complicate things considerably. The territorial authorities won't look kindly on our activities if proof of legitimate ownership surfaces." "Then we make sure it doesn't surface," the leader replied coldly. "Along with whoever's carrying it." They remounted and continued up the trail, but their conversation had revealed more than they probably intended. These weren't simple outlaws or opportunistic claim jumpers. They were working for someone with resources and connections, someone who could fabricate wanted posters and potentially corrupt territorial officials. Emmett had stumbled into something far more dangerous than a local mining dispute. After the riders disappeared, Silas and Loyalty continued their journey through the scarred landscape of broken dreams. The mining country stretched for miles in every direction, a testament to the gold fever that had gripped the territory for decades. Most of the claims had been abandoned when the easy pickings ran out, leaving behind a wasteland of poisoned streams and unstable excavations. But not all the claims were abandoned. As afternoon wore toward evening, they encountered their first occupied mining operation, a rough camp where half a dozen men worked a claim with the desperate intensity of those who had invested everything in one final chance at prosperity. Their leader, a grizzled veteran with arms like tree trunks and eyes that missed nothing, stepped into their path with a rifle held casually but ready. "You boys lost?" he asked, though his tone suggested the question wasn't entirely friendly. "Just passing through," Silas replied carefully. "Looking for the trail to Broken Tooth Pass." The mention of that notorious location brought immediate changes to the miner's demeanor. Weapons appeared from nowhere, and suddenly Silas found himself facing 6 armed men who clearly considered him a potential threat. Nobody goes to Broken Tooth Pass unless they're running from something or chasing something, the leader said. "Which one are you?" Silas made a quick calculation. These men were suspicious, but not necessarily hostile, and they might have information about Emmett's passage through the area. Sometimes the truth, carefully presented, was safer than lies that could be easily discovered. "I'm looking for my brother," he said simply. "He came through here a few weeks ago with a donkey like this one. Younger man, brown hair, probably traveling alone and in a hurry." Recognition flickered in several faces, and the leader's grip on his rifle relaxed slightly. "The fellow with the mining claim." "Yeah, he passed through. Traded some supplies for information about safe trails north. Seemed like a decent sort, though he was clearly running scared." "What did he tell you?" Silas asked. "Said there were men after him who wanted his claim. Claim jumpers with connections to the territorial government. He was trying to get to Fort Benton to file complaints with the federal marshal there." The miner's expression grew grim. "That was 3 weeks ago. Haven't seen hide nor hair of him since." The information confirmed Silas's suspicions about Emmett's motivations, but it also suggested that his brother's plan had gone badly wrong somewhere between here and Fort Benton. Broken Tooth Pass lay directly on that route, the fastest but most dangerous way through the mountains. If Emmett had been forced to take that path, his chances of survival dropped considerably. As darkness gathered, the miners offered Silas and Loyalty shelter for the night, a gesture of frontier hospitality that he gratefully accepted. Around their campfire, he learned more about the violent competition for mining claims in the territory, and the shadowy figures who used legal manipulation and outright murder to steal legitimate finds from honest prospectors. Tomorrow would take them into the most dangerous part of their journey, through country where the law was whatever a man could enforce with gun and determination. But tonight, surrounded by men who had known Emmett and respected his integrity, Silas felt a renewed sense of purpose. His brother had been fighting for something legitimate, something worth defending. Whatever had happened to him in Broken Tooth Pass, he deserved to have someone continue that fight. The 5th day dawned gray and threatening, with heavy clouds rolling in from the northwest and the smell of snow in the air despite the season. Silas and Loyalty left the miners' camp before sunrise, following a trail that grew steadily more treacherous as it wound toward the entrance of Broken Tooth Pass. The landscape around them seemed to mirror the approaching storm. Jagged rocks thrust up from barren soil like broken bones, and twisted trees clung to impossible slopes with desperate tenacity. It was in this desolate country that Silas made a discovery that brought tears to his eyes and changed his understanding of his brother's final days. Hidden beneath a cairn of stones that looked natural but had clearly been arranged with care, he found a small leather pouch containing the most personal artifact yet, a wedding ring strung on a delicate gold chain. The ring was simple but well made, the kind of band a working man might buy for the woman he loved. Inside the band, barely visible in the morning light, were initials engraved with obvious care: EB to MR forever. Emmett Boone to someone whose name began with MR, the same initials carved into the aspen tree days earlier. Maria Rodriguez, perhaps, connected to the Miguel Rodriguez, who had been Emmett's mining partner. The discovery hit Silas like a physical blow. Emmett had married. After all these years of separation, his brother had found love and built a life that included partnership, prosperity, and commitment. The woman who wore this ring had been important enough that Emmett carried it with him, even while fleeing for his life, and precious enough that he'd hidden it carefully rather than risk losing it to thieves or claim jumpers. Loyalty seemed to recognize the ring, nickering softly and nudging Silas's shoulder with obvious affection. The donkey's reaction confirmed what the artifact suggested. This wasn't just some casual relationship, but a marriage that had brought real happiness to both participants. Emmett had found what Silas himself had never managed: someone to share his dreams and struggles. The pouch contained other items that painted a picture of domestic happiness, now shattered by violence. A pressed flower from what looked like a wedding bouquet. A small sketch of a woman's face, drawn with the careful attention to detail that came from love and constant observation. And most heartbreaking of all, a brief letter in feminine handwriting that began, "My dearest Emmett," and spoke of missing him while he was away at the claim. As Silas read the letter by the grey morning light, he began to understand the true scope of what had been taken from his brother. This wasn't just about a mining claim or even personal safety. It was about a man trying to protect the woman he loved from the violence that surrounded them. The letter mentioned threats, men asking questions in town about Emmett's whereabouts, and Maria's growing fear for their future together. "I pray every night that you'll come home safe," the letter concluded. "The money doesn't matter if something happens to you. Please be careful, my love. I couldn't bear to lose you now that we've found each other." The words cut deep because they revealed how isolated Silas had become from normal human emotions. While he'd been nursing his grievances and pride in the mountains, Emmett had been building something beautiful with another person. The marriage represented everything Silas had given up when he chose solitude over the messy complications of human relationships. But it also explained why Emmett had been willing to fight so hard for his mining claim. It wasn't about personal wealth or adventure. It was about providing security for the woman he'd married. A man with a wife to protect might well risk everything rather than surrender to claim jumpers and corrupt officials. The approaching storm forced them to seek shelter in a shallow cave carved into the rocky walls of the pass. As rain began to fall in heavy sheets, Silas found himself studying the sketch of Maria Rodriguez and wondering what had become of her. If Emmett had been running for 3 weeks, she was probably frantic with worry by now. Or worse, if the claim jumpers had decided she was a liability, she might be in as much danger as her husband. Loyalty huddled close to him in the cave. The donkey's presence, a warm comfort against the cold and his own dark thoughts. The animal's loyalty to Emmett extended to protecting anything connected to his master, including artifacts that held sentimental rather than practical value. The wedding ring on its chain represented love and commitment, emotions that transcended the brutal realities of frontier justice and mining politics. As afternoon wore toward evening, the storm intensified rather than passing through. Lightning illuminated the pass in stark black and white, revealing just how treacherous the route ahead would be. This was the country where travelers disappeared without explanation, where the bones of the unwary littered hidden gulches and forgotten valleys. But it was also where Emmett had come in his desperate flight toward Fort Benton and federal protection. Somewhere ahead, perhaps only hours away, lay the answers to questions that had driven Silas from his mountain sanctuary. Whether those answers involved rescue or burial remained to be seen, but the wedding ring had given new urgency to the quest. During a brief lull in the storm, Silas heard something that made his blood run cold. the sound of horses moving through the pass despite the dangerous conditions. The three riders who had been pursuing them were close enough now that weather wasn't going to stop them. They were committed to catching up with Loyalty and whoever was traveling with the donkey. "We're going to have company soon," Silas whispered to the animal, checking his weapons and mentally reviewing the limited options available to them. The cave provided shelter, but would become a trap if they were discovered. Moving in the storm was dangerous, but might be their only chance to avoid a confrontation they weren't equipped to win. Loyalty's response surprised him. Instead of showing fear, the donkey moved to the cave entrance and looked back the way they had come, ears pricked forward with obvious determination. There was something almost human in that gaze, a quality of resolve that spoke of experiences far beyond what any ordinary pack animal should possess. "You've been through this before, haven't you?" Silas asked quietly. "You helped him escape once already. Maybe you can do it again." The rain continued to fall as darkness gathered, but Silas felt a strange sense of peace settling over him. He'd spent 15 years avoiding conflict and human complications, but now he was committed to a course that might well end in violence. The wedding ring in his pocket reminded him that some things were worth fighting for, even if the odds were hopeless. Tomorrow would bring them to the heart of Broken Tooth Pass, where his brother's fate had been decided. Whether it brought rescue or revenge, Silas was ready to face whatever waited in the shadows ahead. The storm passed near midnight, leaving the air crisp and clean, but the rocks treacherous with moisture. Silas had dozed fitfully in the cave, waking every few minutes to check on Loyalty and listen for sounds of pursuit. When dawn finally came, pale and uncertain through the mountain mist, he made a discovery that changed everything he thought he knew about their situation. While grooming Loyalty in preparation for the day's travel, Silas noticed that one section of the donkey's pack saddle sat differently than the others, as if something had shifted during the night. Investigating more carefully, his fingers found what felt like a hidden compartment sewn into the leather itself, so skillfully concealed that only someone with his tracking experience might have detected it. Working carefully with his knife, he opened the secret compartment and withdrew a piece of oiled cloth that had been wrapped around something precious. Inside lay a letter written in Emmett's careful handwriting, but the words it contained made Silas's world tilt on its axis. "Silas," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then Loyalty found you like I prayed he would, and you cared enough about your stubborn brother to follow him back into danger. I know what you're thinking, that I'm dead or captured, that this is about revenge or rescue. But you're wrong, brother. I'm alive, but I'm trapped, and I need your help more than I've ever needed anything in my life." Silas read the words again, hardly daring to believe them. Emmett was alive. The note, tied to Loyalty's halter, hadn't been a dying man's farewell. It had been a deliberate message designed to bring Silas to a specific place at a specific time. His brother had orchestrated this entire journey, using their shared history and the donkey's intelligence to guide him toward a reunion 15 years in the making. "The men who killed Miguel have me prisoner in the old Spanish mine at Devil's Gate, about 2 miles past the narrowest part of Broken Tooth Pass," the letter continued. "They're using me to work the claim they murdered him for, but they plan to kill me as soon as they've extracted everything valuable. They don't know about this letter, or that I trained Loyalty to find you if something went wrong. This revelation that Emmett was being held as forced labor rather than hiding as a fugitive reframed everything Silas had observed over the past week. The wanted poster was indeed fabricated, designed to turn law enforcement against Emmett rather than helping him. The claim jumpers had taken a more subtle approach than simple murder. They were using his expertise to maximize the value of their stolen property before disposing of him permanently. "I know you think I'm a fool for getting into this situation," Emmett's letter went on, "and maybe you're right. But Maria is pregnant, Silas. We're going to have a baby, and I couldn't let these bastards take away our chance at a real future. The claim is worth more than we ever imagined, enough to set up our family for generations. I had to fight for it. The news of impending fatherhood hit Silas like a physical blow. Emmett wasn't just a husband now, he was going to be a father. The stakes of their situation had just become immeasurably higher. A pregnant wife waiting at home, probably frantic with worry. A brother trapped in a mine, forced to work for the men who had murdered his partner. And somewhere in the distance, the sound of horses that meant their pursuers were getting closer. The men holding me don't know about Maria's condition, the letter continued. She's staying with her sister in Silver Creek until I can make things safe. If something happens to me, please find her and tell her that I tried to do right by our child. Tell her that every day in this hole, I thought about holding our baby and giving him or her the kind of life our father gave us before everything went wrong. Silas found himself gripping the letter so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The mention of their father and the life they'd shared before pride and anger drove them apart was like a key turning in a lock he'd kept sealed for 15 years. Emmett remembered the good times too. The brotherhood they'd shared before adult complications destroyed their family bonds. I've been training loyalty for weeks to make this journey if necessary, the letter explained. He knows the way to your cabin and back again. More importantly, he knows the secret trails that avoid the main routes where the claim jumpers have posted sentries. Follow his lead completely. He'll take you to places where you can observe the mine without being detected. The men holding me don't expect rescue because they think I'm completely alone in the world. The sophisticated planning revealed in the letter showed a side of Emmett that Silas had never fully appreciated. His younger brother had grown into a man capable of complex strategy and long-term thinking, someone who could train an animal to carry out an intricate rescue mission. The Emmett he remembered from their youth had been impulsive and emotional. This version was calculating and patient. There are 6 of them total, the letter continued. But only 2 or 3 stay at the mine at any given time. The others rotate back to town to maintain their legitimate businesses. The leader is a man named Fletcher, who owns the hardware store in Millerville. He uses his position to gather information about successful claims and then organizes the takeovers. He's smart, ruthless, and connected to territorial officials who look the other way in exchange for payoffs. The scope of the corruption was staggering. This wasn't just about one mining claim or even one family's tragedy. It was a systematic operation designed to steal from honest prospectors across the entire territory. Emmett had stumbled into something much larger and more dangerous than a simple dispute over mining rights. I need you to know that I never stopped thinking about you during these 15 years. Emmett's letter concluded. I was too proud to make the first move toward reconciliation and too ashamed of my failures to believe you'd want anything to do with me. But now, facing the possibility that I might never see another sunrise, all I can think about is how much time we've wasted being angry about things that don't matter anymore. Silas felt tears streaming down his face as he read those final words. The anger and resentment he'd nursed for 15 years suddenly seemed small and petty compared to the love and forgiveness his brother was offering. Emmett had never stopped thinking of him as family, had never given up hope that their brotherhood could be restored. The mine entrance is hidden behind a rockfall that looks natural but was actually engineered to conceal the opening, the letter's final paragraph explained. Loyalty knows where it is and how to approach without triggering the sentries they've posted. Trust him completely, brother. He's risked everything to bring you this message, just like I'm risking everything by sending it. If we're going to save our family, we have to do it together. Loyalty watched him read with obvious intelligence, as if the donkey understood every word and was waiting for Silas's response. The animal's brown eyes held depths of loyalty and courage that put human commitment to shame. This wasn't just a pack animal. It was a partner, a friend, and now a conspirator in what might be the most important mission of Silas's life. The sound of approaching horses was growing louder, which meant decision time was rapidly approaching. He could try to evade their pursuers and make his way back to his mountain sanctuary, pretending he'd never received Emmett's message. Or he could trust in Loyalty's training and his own wilderness skills to attempt a rescue that would either reunite their family or get them both killed, as Silas folded the letter and tucked it carefully into his shirt pocket next to Emmett's original note. He realized there had never really been a choice at all. Family was family, and 15 years of separation couldn't change the fundamental truth of brotherhood. Whatever dangers lay ahead in the Spanish mine at Devil's Gate, he would face them with the same stubborn determination that ran in Boone blood. "All right, old friend," he whispered to Loyalty. "Let's go bring our boy home." The approach to Devil's Gate took them through country that seemed designed by malevolent gods to test human determination. Narrow ledges wound along cliff faces where a single misstep meant a fall that would kill man and beast alike. Loyalty moved with the sure-footed confidence of an animal that had traveled this route before, but Silas found himself gripping the donkey's lead rope with white knuckles as they navigated passages barely wide enough for their bodies. Below them, the sounds of their pursuers echoed off the canyon walls, horses nickering, men calling to each other, the scrape of iron shoes on stone. The three riders had gained ground during the night and were now close enough that Silas could occasionally make out individual words. Their urgency suggested they knew exactly where. Loyalty was leading him and were desperate to prevent the reunion that Emmett had planned so carefully. "Can't be much farther now," he heard the leader call to his companions. "The old mine entrance is just past the Devil's Teeth formations. If we can cut them off there, we'll have them trapped." The knowledge that their destination was known to their enemies added new urgency to Silas's movements. Whatever advantage Emmett's careful planning had provided was rapidly evaporating. They would reach the mine ahead of their pursuers, but probably not by much. Any rescue attempt would have to be swift and decisive. As they rounded a particularly treacherous bend in the trail, Silas caught his first glimpse of the Spanish mine that had become his brother's prison. The entrance was indeed hidden behind what looked like a natural rockfall. But Loyalty's behavior revealed the truth. The donkey moved directly toward a specific section of fallen stones and began pawing at what looked like solid rock. Following Loyalty's lead, Silas discovered that the apparent rockfall was actually a carefully constructed facade. The stones had been arranged to conceal a tunnel entrance large enough for men and equipment to pass through easily. More importantly, the opening was positioned so that sentries inside could observe the surrounding terrain while remaining invisible to casual observers. From a hiding place behind a cluster of boulders, Silas studied the mine entrance and the terrain around it. Emmett's letter had mentioned 6 men total, with only 2 or 3 staying at the mine at any given time. But how many were there now, and how were they positioned? The wrong guess could mean death for both brothers and continued captivity for Maria's unborn child. As if reading his thoughts, Loyalty moved to a different vantage point and looked meaningfully toward a section of the mountainside above the mine entrance. Following the donkey's gaze, Silas spotted something that made his heart race. A piece of cloth tied to a stunted pine tree in a pattern that looked random, but clearly wasn't. It was a signal, arranged by someone who knew they would be observed from this exact position. The cloth was positioned to indicate numbers. 3 vertical strips meant 3 guards, while their arrangement showed where they were stationed. 1 at the mine entrance, 1 inside the tunnel, and 1 at a lookout post higher up the mountainside. Emmett was not only alive, but actively cooperating in his own rescue. Using a signaling system he and Loyalty had obviously practiced in advance. But as Silas studied the layout more carefully, he realized that 3 guards were still formidable odds for 1 aging hermit and a donkey, no matter how intelligent the animal might be. His father's rifle was accurate and deadly, but it was also a single-shot weapon that would leave him defenseless during reloading. If his first shot didn't eliminate multiple threats or cause the survivors to flee, he would likely join Emmett in captivity, or worse. The sound of approaching horses reminded him that time was running short. In perhaps 15 minutes, their pursuers would arrive and eliminate any element of surprise. If a rescue was going to happen, it had to happen now, ready or not. It was then that Silas noticed something that changed his understanding of the tactical situation entirely. Hidden among his gear, wrapped carefully in oiled cloth, was an item that Emmett must have placed there during one of Loyalty's earlier trips. Their father's old hunting knife, the one that had been missing from the cabin for 15 years. But this wasn't the same weapon Silas remembered from their childhood. Someone had modified it, adding a longer blade and what looked like a carefully balanced throwing weight. Attached to the knife was a brief note in Emmett's handwriting. "Father always said you were the better shot, but I was better with blades. This might even the odds a little." The guard at the entrance has a bad habit of turning his back every 10 minutes to check something inside the tunnel. "That's your window. I'll be ready." The knife felt perfect in Silas's hand, balanced exactly right for throwing despite the modifications. Emmett had obviously spent considerable time working on it, turning their father's old hunting tool into a precision weapon. More than that, he'd provided specific intelligence about the guard's behavior patterns and timing. Even from inside the mine, he was still trying to orchestrate his own rescue. Loyalty seemed to sense that action was imminent. The donkey moved to a position that would give them both cover and a clear approach route to the mine entrance, then looked back at Silas with obvious expectation. Everything was in place. The signal system, the modified weapon, the timing information, even the means of approach. All that remained was for Silas to find the courage to act. As he prepared for what might be his final action as a free man, Silas found himself thinking about the life he'd wasted in his mountain sanctuary. 15 years of solitude, nursing grudges and avoiding the complications of human relationships. While he'd been playing hermit, Emmett had fallen in love, married, built a legitimate business, and was now preparing to become a father. His brother had lived, while Silas had merely existed. But perhaps it wasn't too late to change that pattern. Perhaps an old hermit could still learn new tricks, still find the courage to fight for something more important than his own peace of mind. The wedding ring in his pocket reminded him that love was worth fighting for, worth risking everything to protect. Maria Rodriguez was counting on him now, whether she knew it or not. Her unborn child deserved to know its father. The guard at the mine entrance shifted position, just as Emmett's note had predicted. In exactly 7 minutes, if the pattern held, he would turn his back and provide the window of opportunity that might be their only chance. Silas checked his father's rifle one more time, made sure the modified knife was positioned for easy throwing, and tried to calm his racing heart. Loyalty pressed against his leg in a gesture of comfort and solidarity. The donkey's courage put his own fears to shame. This animal had already risked everything to bring Emmett's message to him, had traveled hundreds of dangerous miles through hostile territory, guided only by training and loyalty. If a donkey could show such determination, surely a boon could match it. The approaching sound of horses grew louder, echoing off the canyon walls like thunder. Their pursuers would be here soon, which meant the rescue attempt had to begin now or not at all. Silas rose from his hiding place and began moving toward the mine entrance, following the approach route that Loyalty's positioning had indicated. As he moved, Silas found himself remembering something their father had told them during their last hunting trip together, shortly before the illness that would kill him. "Boys," the old man had said, "there comes a time in every man's life when he has to choose between what's safe and what's right. When that moment comes, don't think too long. Just act on what you know in your heart to be true." Silas knew what was true now. Family was more important than safety. Love was worth fighting for. And 15 years of separation was long enough for any family to endure. As he raised his father's rifle and prepared to announce his presence to the guards, he felt a peace he hadn't known since childhood. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, he would face it as a boon, with courage, determination, and an absolute refusal to abandon the people who mattered most. The guard began his turn toward the tunnel entrance, just as Emmett had predicted. Silas took careful aim and prepared to change everything. The shot echoed through the canyon like divine judgment, and the guard at the mine entrance crumpled without a sound. Silas's aim had been true, just as their father had taught him all those years ago on hunting trips in these same mountains. The modified rifle, their father's weapon, passed down through generations of Boones, had spoken with the authority of family honor and brotherly love. Loyalty immediately began moving toward the mine entrance, following what was clearly a rehearsed plan. The donkey's intelligence and training showed in every step as he approached the concealed opening without hesitation, positioning himself to block the tunnel mouth and prevent escape while Silas dealt with the remaining guards. The second guard emerged from the tunnel entrance at the sound of the gunshot, his own weapon drawn, but his eyes struggling to adjust from the darkness inside to the bright mountain sunlight. Silas didn't give him time to focus. The modified hunting knife left his hand with the precision of countless hours of practice, spinning end over end before finding its target with a wet thud. "Emmett!" Silas called into the tunnel darkness. "It's Silas. I'm here." The response came immediately, his brother's voice hoarse but unmistakably alive. "Silas! Thank God. There's one more guard inside, armed with a shotgun. Be careful." The warning came just in time. Silas threw himself sideways as buckshot peppered the rocks where he'd been standing. The third guard had positioned himself well inside the tunnel, using the darkness as cover while he aimed at the bright rectangle of the entrance. It was a smart, defensive position that would be nearly impossible to assault directly. But Emmett wasn't finished providing intelligence. "His name is Carson," his brother shouted from somewhere deep in the mine. "He's got a nervous trigger finger and can't see worth a damn in the dark without his spectacles. They're hanging on his belt." The information painted a tactical picture that Silas could work with. A nervous man with poor vision in a dark tunnel, dependent on eyeglasses he wasn't currently wearing. The kind of adversary who might make mistakes if pressured properly. "Carson," Silas called into the tunnel. "Your friends are dead. Throw down your weapon and you can walk out of here alive." The response was immediate. Another blast of buckshot that went wide but showed the guard's position more precisely. He was perhaps 20 feet inside the tunnel, positioned behind what sounded like mining equipment that would provide good cover from direct assault but limit his own. Mobility, loyalty solved the tactical problem with the kind of animal cunning that no human planning could have anticipated. The donkey began braying loudly, not in fear or pain, but with the deliberate rhythmic call that donkeys use to communicate over long distances. The sound echoed and amplified in the tunnel's confines, creating a disorienting cacophony that would make accurate shooting nearly impossible. Under cover of loyalty's noise, Silas moved into the tunnel entrance and pressed himself against the left wall. The guard's next shot went wide right, confirming that he was firing blind and probably couldn't hear much over the donkey's continued braying. Silas began moving deeper into the tunnel, using the wall as a guide and counting steps to judge distance. At 15 steps, he could make out the guard's silhouette against the faint light that filtered in from deeper workings. Carson was reloading frantically, his hands shaking as he tried to break open his shotgun and insert fresh shells. The man's glasses hung from his belt exactly where Emmett had said they would, and his squinting, desperate movements confirmed his poor vision. "It's over." "Carson," Silas said quietly, and the guard spun toward his voice with the shotgun half-loaded. The final confrontation lasted only seconds. Carson tried to bring his weapon to bear, but Silas was already inside his defensive perimeter. The butt of the rifle connected with Carson's temple in a precise blow that their father had taught them for finishing wounded animals. The guard dropped without firing another shot. His shotgun clattering harmlessly on the tunnel floor, silence fell over the mine, broken only by loyalty's continued braying and the sound of footsteps approaching from the deeper workings. Silas raised his rifle, then lowered it as a familiar figure emerged from the shadows, older, thinner, marked by weeks of captivity, but unmistakably his brother. Emmett Boone stood in the tunnel entrance for a long moment, staring at Silas as if he might be a mirage brought on by desperation and hope. Then he smiled, the same crooked grin Silas remembered from their childhood, and stepped forward with his arms outstretched. "Hello, brother," Emmett said simply. "Thank you for coming." The embrace that followed was 15 years in the making, a reunion of hearts and souls that had been separated by pride and misunderstanding, but never truly broken. Silas felt tears streaming down his face as he held his brother close, feeling how thin Emmett had become during his captivity, but also sensing the unbroken strength that had sustained him through weeks of forced labor and constant danger. "I'm sorry," Silas whispered, "for everything, for all the wasted years." "We're both sorry," Emmett replied, "but we're together now. That's what matters." Loyalty's braying had stopped, and in the sudden silence they could hear what they'd both been dreading: the sound of horses approaching fast up the canyon trail. Their pursuers had arrived. "How many sticks of dynamite do they have stored in here?" Silas asked, as the sound of approaching horses grew louder. Emmett's eyes lit up with understanding. "Enough to bring down half the mountain. They've been blasting new shafts deeper into the claim. There's a whole crate of it, about 50 yards back in the main workings." The brothers moved quickly through the tunnel, Loyalty following with the sure-footed confidence of an animal that had learned the mine's layout during previous visits. The sound of their pursuers grew closer, voices calling to each other, the scrape and clatter of men dismounting and approaching the mine entrance. "There they are," came a shout from outside. "The donkey's here, and there are bodies by the entrance." In the deeper workings of the mine, Emmett led Silas to where the claim jumpers had stored their blasting supplies. The wooden crate was marked with skull and crossbones, and warnings about proper handling, but desperation made them careless with safety protocols. Emmett grabbed an armload of dynamite sticks while Silas searched for fuse material. "There's another way out," Emmett explained as they worked. "An old air shaft that comes out about a quarter-mile down the canyon. It's narrow, but we can make it if we move fast. The question is how to delay them long enough to get clear." The answer came from their father's teachings about controlled explosions for clearing tree stumps and building roads. A properly placed charge could bring down the tunnel roof behind them, sealing the mine and eliminating any chance of immediate pursuit. But the timing would have to be perfect, too soon, and they'd trap themselves. Too late, and their enemies would catch them in the tunnel. Outside, they could hear Fletcher's voice giving orders to his men. "Spread out and watch all the approaches. They can't have gone far, and that donkey won't leave without his master. We'll smoke them out if we have to." "The air shaft is this way," Emmett whispered, leading them toward a narrow opening that had been carved into the tunnel wall. "But Silas, there's something you need to know. The people holding me, they're not just claim jumpers. Fletcher's been working with territorial officials to systematically steal claims across the entire region. If we expose him, we might bring down a corruption network that reaches all the way to the territorial capital." The scope of the conspiracy was staggering, but it also provided an opportunity. Men involved in such extensive criminal activities would have extensive resources, but also extensive vulnerabilities. They couldn't afford to let witnesses escape. But they also couldn't afford too much public attention. Silas set the charges with the care their father had taught him, positioning them to bring down specific sections of the tunnel roof while leaving their escape route intact. The fuse would give them perhaps 3 minutes to reach safety, enough time if everything went according to plan, but no margin for error. "Ready?" Emmett asked as Silas lit the fuse. They moved through the narrow air shaft with desperate urgency, Loyalty somehow managing to follow despite the confined space. Behind them, the fuse burned steadily toward the charges that would determine whether they escaped or died together in the mountain's embrace. The air shaft was a nightmare of loose rock and narrow passages, but Emmett's knowledge of its layout proved accurate. They emerged into daylight, just as the explosion rumbled through the mountain behind them, sending a column of dust and debris shooting from the mine entrance like a cannon blast. But their freedom was temporary. Fletcher and his men had anticipated the possibility of another exit and had positioned sentries to watch the surrounding terrain. Even as the dust settled from the explosion, Silas could see armed figures moving to surround their position. "There!" Fletcher's voice carried clearly in the mountain air. "The air shaft. I told you they'd try to rabbit through there." The final confrontation was inevitable now. 3 armed men against 2 brothers and a donkey in open terrain that offered little cover. But Emmett had one more surprise prepared. During his weeks of captivity, he'd learned things about Fletcher's operation that could be turned against him. "Fletcher," Emmett called out as the men approached. "I know about the federal marshal's investigation, about the evidence you've been trying to bury. Kill us, and you'll only confirm what he already suspects." The claim jumper's advance faltered. "You're bluffing, Boone. There's no investigation. Marshal Davidson from Fort Benton has been tracking the pattern of claim thefts for months. He's already connected 3 other operations to territorial officials. Your name came up more than once." Emmett's voice carried the confidence of a man with nothing left to lose. "Kill me, and you'll have federal authorities crawling over this entire operation within the week." Fletcher's hesitation lasted only seconds, but it was enough for Silas to act. His father's rifle spoke once more, and the man with the pearl-handled pistol fell forward into the mountain dust. The remaining 2 guards broke and ran, their courage evaporating with their leader's death. As silence settled over the canyon, broken only by the sound of retreating hoofbeats, the brothers stood side by side and watched their enemies disappear into the distance. They had won, but at a cost that would change everything about their lives going forward. "What now?" Silas asked. Emmett smiled and put his arm around his brother's shoulders. "Now we go home to Maria and start over. All of us together." 3 months later, Silas sat on the porch of a small cabin in Silver Creek, watching his brother carve a new wooden horse while Maria Rodriguez Boone hummed softly in the kitchen, her pregnancy now showing clearly beneath her worn but clean dress. The scene was so peaceful, it was hard to believe they had ever faced mortal danger in the mountains. Harder still to remember the 15 years of bitter separation that had preceded their reunion, the new horse taking shape. Under Emmett's careful knife was different from the childhood toy that had started their journey toward reconciliation. This one was larger, more detailed, carved with the skill of a man who had learned patience through suffering and found joy again through love. But more than that, it was being made as a gift, the first of many toys for the child who would be born before winter's end. "Remember how you used to get so angry when I spent hours whittling?" Emmett asked without looking up from his work. "You said it was a waste of time when there was real work to be done." Silas smiled and leaned back in his chair, a piece of furniture that creaked with age, but supported him with the solid reliability of things built to last. "I was wrong about a lot of things in those days. Seems like I spent most of my life being wrong about what really mattered." The wooden horse was taking final shape now, its mane carved with delicate attention to detail, and its stance suggesting movement and life. Emmett had always been gifted with his hands, able to create beauty from raw wood in ways that seemed almost magical. Watching him work brought back memories of childhood winters when they'd sit by the fire, while their father read and their mother mended clothes. 2 boys finding wonder in the simple act of making something useful from nothing. "I've been thinking about names," Maria said from the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel as she joined them on the porch. "If it's a boy, I'd like to call him William, after your father. Emmett tells me he was a good man who deserved to be remembered." The suggestion brought tears to Silas's eyes. Their father had been a good man, patient and wise in ways that his sons had only begun to appreciate after he was gone. The idea that his name would live on in a new generation felt like a blessing, a chance for the family to start fresh while honoring its roots. "And if it's a girl?" Silas asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Margaret," Maria replied with a smile. "After your mother. Emmett says she had your father's patience and twice his stubborn determination. Sounds like qualities our daughter might need in this family." The easy way she included Silas in planning for their child's future spoke to the generous heart that had captured Emmett's love and now welcomed his brother without reservation. Maria had every right to resent the man whose pride had cost them 15 years of family support. But instead, she treated him like the brother-in-law he should always have been. Loyalty grazed peacefully in the small paddock behind the cabin. His role as messenger and rescuer now transformed into that of beloved family pet. The donkey had earned his retirement through courage and loyalty that put human virtue to shame. He would live out his days in comfort, surrounded by the family he had helped reunite through his determination and intelligence. The cabin itself was modest but well-built, constructed with Silas's mountain-honed skills and Emmett's careful planning. It sat on a small piece of land they'd purchased with gold from the legitimate claim that had started their troubles, money that Fletcher's corrupt network would never be able to touch now that federal authorities were investigating the Territorial Mining Administration. Marshal Davidson stopped by. "Yesterday, while you were in town," Emmett mentioned as he put the finishing touches on the wooden horse. "Says the investigation is going better than expected. Turns out Fletcher kept detailed records of his bribes and partnerships. They've already arrested 2 territorial officials and identified at least a dozen other mining operations that were stolen through similar schemes." The news was satisfying in ways that went beyond personal justice. Emmett's courage in fighting for his legitimate claim had exposed corruption that had been stealing from honest prospectors for years. His suffering had ultimately protected other families from similar tragedies, giving meaning to the pain he'd endured as Fletcher's prisoner. "What about the others who worked with Fletcher?" Silas asked, scattered to the winds when they heard about the federal investigation. "The marshal thinks most of them will try to disappear rather than risk exposure. Without Fletcher to coordinate things, the whole network is falling apart." As the afternoon sun began to sink toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the peaceful valley, Silas reflected on how completely his life had changed. 3 months ago he had been a hermit, nursing grievances and avoiding human connection. Now he was part of a growing family, uncle to an unborn child, and brother to a man he respected more than he'd ever thought possible. The wooden horse was finished now, its surface smooth and ready for the small hands that would hold it in the months and years to come. Emmett held it up to catch the light, examining his work with the critical eye of a craftsman who refused to accept anything less than his best effort. "It's beautiful," Maria said, taking the toy and running her fingers over its carved details. "Our child is going to love it, just like his father loved the first one you carved," Silas added quietly. "Before I threw it in the creek in a fit of jealous temper." Emmett looked at him with the same forgiveness he'd shown that day so long ago, when a hurt little boy had fished his treasure from the cold water and dried it carefully by the fire. "We all make mistakes, Silas. The important thing is what we do afterward." As darkness gathered around their small family circle, Silas felt a peace he hadn't known since childhood. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities. But tonight there was only love, forgiveness, and the promise of new life growing within the woman who had brought them all together. The wooden horse sat on the porch rail between them, a symbol of craftsmanship, patience, and the enduring power of family bonds to overcome any obstacle. Some gifts, Silas realized, were worth waiting 15 years to give and receive.